Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
In a week which saw the Northern Irish local government elections, problems with the cash equivalent transfer value of public sector pensions, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak asserting his view that legal migration to the UK is too high, Brexit is still very much front and centre. Dennis.
Indeed it is. And here's a question. Did anyone really believe that the government could repeal over 4,000 EU laws in a year after Brexit? Or is this another example of political rhetoric making bad law? Here's the story. The government is to amend drafting in the retained EU law revocation and reform bill, under which almost all EU law would have been automatically revoked at the end of 2023, unless a statutory instrument was passed to preserve it. In a ministerial statement, Kemi Badenoch, Secretary of State for Business and Trade, said, "Over the past year, Whitehall departments have been working hard to identify retained EU law to preserve, reform or revoke. However, with the growing volume of EU law being identified, and the risks of legal uncertainty posed by sunsetting instruments made under EU law, it has become clear that the programme was becoming more about reducing legal risk by preserving EU laws than prioritising meaningful reform." Badenoch said that the government would table an amendment which would replace the current sunset in the bill with a list of the retained EU laws that it intends to revoke under the bill at the end of 2023. The Secretary of State added, "We will still fully take back control of our laws and end the supremacy and special status of retained EU law by the end of 2023. We will also make our laws fit for UK purposes, reducing the regulatory burden and controlling the flow of new regulation. We will no longer tie business up in red tape," she said. Badenoch also said that the government had already revoked or reformed over 1,000 EU laws since the country's exit from the EU. In addition to the list of around 600 we proposed to revoke directly through the new bill, the Financial Services and Markets Bill and the Procurement Bill will revoke around a further 500 pieces of EU law. Now, no one ever believed, as far as I can see, that the original plan to remove over 4,000 laws within a year would ever be achievable. And now, clearly, those who dreamt up the idea also agree.
Indeed. Now, the Renters Reform Bill announced on the 17th of May will, says the government, deliver on the government's commitment to bring in a better deal for renters, including abolishing no-fault evictions and reforming landlord possession grounds. It will legislate for reforms set out in the Private Rented Sector White Paper, which was published back in June 2022. Now, this is quite a big change for the private rental sector, which is unrecognisable since the days of the old Rent Act tenancies, for those of you long enough in the tooth to remember those. So let's take a look at what's being introduced. Well, it will abolish Section 21 no-fault evictions and move to a simpler tenancy structure where all assured tenancies are periodic. It will introduce more comprehensive possession grounds so landlords can still recover their property, including where they wish to sell their property or move in close family. And it will make it easier to repossess properties where tenants are at fault, for example, in cases of antisocial behaviour and repeat rent arrears. It will provide stronger protections against backdoor eviction by ensuring tenants are able to appeal excessively above market rents, which are purely designed to force them out. How that will be measured remains to be seen. It will introduce a new private rented sector ombudsman, create a privately rented property portal to help landlords understand their legal obligations and demonstrate compliance, which will also aim to support local councils, helping them target enforcement activity where it's needed most. And it will also give tenants the right to request a pet in the property, which the landlord must consider and cannot unreasonably refuse. And to support this, landlords will be able to require pet insurance to cover any damage to their property. The government are also pledging as a priority to work closely with Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, including end-to-end digitalisation of the process and prioritisation of certain cases. Let's hope that goes better than the Magistrates and Crown Court case management system. Dennis.
Indeed. The Post Office Horizon IT scandal has been in the news for some time. There's now a judge-led inquiry going on, whose attention is now focusing upon the role of lawyers, both internal and external. But there may be lessons for us to learn too. Here's my story on this.
Research has concluded that the Post Office scandal highlights the dangers of lawyers absorbing and reflecting back their client organisation's view without sufficient independence and critical detachment. But first, the background. Hundreds of postmasters were wrongly convicted of criminal offences by the Post Office on the basis of flawed evidence over a period of years. These cases were handled by in-house legal teams, by prominent external firms and senior well-known barristers, and were even separately reviewed by leading external lawyers, none of whom found fault with any of these prosecution cases that were subsequently overturned on appeal. It really is both unbelievable and shocking, particularly as the names of those involved are now slowly coming to light. Senior Judge Sir Win Williams is conducting an inquiry into the scandal and has received a paper from Exeter University which suggests that all of these lawyers may have been susceptible to psychological and social biases that served to blind them from the truth as we now know it. The paper argues that in dealing with an organisation that could not grasp the possibility that its prosecution processes were flawed, lawyers absorbed and reflected back their client's view without sufficient independence and critical detachment. These tendencies could particularly apply to in-house solicitors in a wide range of situations, including to our own members. The authors of the paper said lawyers were vulnerable to a range of predispositions such that they cannot help but see, to some extent, through the eyes of their client, and without sufficient independence of thought and professional curiosity. The fact that the issues identified in the scandal inquiry stretched across so many private practice and in-house lawyers all suggest that a much wider and much deeper problem exists for lawyers from all working backgrounds, but especially in employed situations like in local government.
Now, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Michael Gove, has written to 10 local planning authorities at risk of designation under Section 62A of the Town and Country Planning Act. In the letter, he states, "I have significant concerns about the performance of a handful of local authorities, including your council," and carries on following performance statistics. Mr. Gove states that it is indicative of a very poor quality service to local residents and a significant deterrent to investment in your local housing market and wider economy. That is not good enough, he says, and despite some more encouraging recent data, I am therefore minded to designate your authority. These are very strongly worded letters, and of course the consequence of formal designation is that applicants could submit relevant planning applications directly to the Planning Inspectorate. The Secretary of State has asked the Planning Inspectorate to prepare for designations over the summer period, where authorities have not sufficiently improved, by next month. Now, Dennis, what's your last item today?
Well, of course, I read the legal news regularly as part of my job, but have you noticed, like me, that there seems to be a logjam in Parliament? New bills come forward, then they disappear. Some take ages to be enacted, like the Levelling Up bill. Well, what's going on? The Hansard Society have the answer.
On the 10th of May, it was 1 year since the 2022 Queen's speech, but so many bills have yet to secure royal assent that the government is now extending the current parliamentary session. The Hansard Society say that over the last year, a combination of political and economic turmoil, policy development failures and poor parliamentary handling have all combined to clog up the legislative machine to such an extent that the government has extended the parliamentary session in order to get through its agenda. Normally, a session lasts for around 12 months, but for the current session, this landmark was passed on the 10th of May. No date for the end of this now extended session has yet been confirmed, but it is widely expected that Parliament will be prorogued for a new King's Speech in November. The logjam looks like this. Of 51 government bills that have been presented to Parliament since the Queen's Speech in May last year, only 22 have achieved royal assent. One has been formally withdrawn, and 28 formally remain under consideration. Of the 28 bills that have not yet received royal assent, 9 bills are still in the Commons, 12 bills are in the Lords, 4 bills are in ping-pong between the two houses, and 3 bills are effectively stalled and are unlikely to proceed further in this session, but have not been formally withdrawn. You'll know the phrase that local authorities are creatures of statute, so this logjam is not good news for local government.
Nor for anyone else, Dennis. Now, the Ministry of Justice has opened a call for evidence in which they want evidence on a range of topics covering open justice, access to data, and the transparency of court and tribunal services. The government has not undertaken a public consultation on open justice since 2012. Since that time, the justice system has undergone a period of modernisation, with the HMCTS reform programme central to this transformation. The MoJ states that digitalisation of the justice system presents both opportunities and risks for open justice and raises important questions on the balance between openness and privacy. As the justice system modernises, it is necessary to examine how open justice continues to be upheld, and furthermore, ensure it's advancing open justice in a way that will meet the rising expectation to access justice in a more modern and digitalised way. In 2022, the Justice Select Committee began an inquiry examining the effects of digitalisation on the courts, the media, and open justice. This concluded with the publication of its report, Court Reporting in the Digital Age. The JSC report produced a series of recommendations concerning topics such as published listings, broadcasting, remote observation, access to court documents, and the publication of judgments. The contents of this present call for evidence covers many of the issues raised in the JSC report, but it has been expanded to include open justice matters which affect all members of the public. The call for evidence closes on the 7th of September. And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 19, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And the same from me too.
Thank you for listening. Have a good week, everyone.